I just finished a conversation with a man that was running by here in the park, and we're talking about, I was talking about discipleship, and how do you decide who is telling the truth and who isn't. And they got across the subject of ex-President Trump. Well, I think he's a trustworthy man, he said. Well, I said, I couldn't vote for him, and he didn't understand the principle, which is in the Bible. See, this is how you bear out and prove out your salvation. First of all, the subject of discipleship was you can't be a lone ranger as a disciple. Well, actually, a large part of your life as a true and faithful disciple is by yourself. You can't always be with a group of Christians all the time in all circumstances, morning, noon, and night, 24/7. Most of the time when you get a chance to share your faith, which is a key part of being a disciple, you're not with any Christians, you're by yourself. And you may be with other Christians and you can reinforce one another's witness, and that's great. But it's not always going to be the case, hardly ever. And so then he talks about trustworthiness in a person. Another subject, I can't trust a man who acts in a small way, unsatisfactory, actually not dealing with the truth all the time, not consistent and not open. And larger things, I don't have to look at the larger things. If you disprove to me that you're not trustworthy in small things, the Bible indicates don't bother with the larger things. Move away. That's the difference between a believer and an unbeliever, or a mature Christian and an immature one, is that you don't open up your entire life to somebody all at once, and then if they if they do something, they can do a great deal of damage. If they do something to you in an unfaithful manner in a small way, your losses aren't that great, and you move away and distance yourself from them. Any case, we're looking at what is trustworthy in the Bible. How do you know if it is? If anything is? Well, we're looking at what are the reasons why the Bible can be trusted. Because its message is consistent, and it's trustworthy when you proved it out. We have tremendous corroboration over thousands and thousands of documents, copies, manuscript evidence, and we went to archaeology. Now, we went to an archaeological point of view here now, the documentary part of archaeology. Documents discovered in digs and elsewhere. Documentary confirmation of the Old Testament accounts relative to corroborating, in this case, its historicity. Because there are so many things that authenticate a work of this ancient value, or any work. A man's life, over a period of time, you watch him in every detail, just like a disciple. And if they don't do a lot of good things in small things, you don't trust them. In this case, you find small things in the Bible, many of them that don't corroborate its consistency, are actually inerrant, then you can't trust the rest of the book. So, can we trust the Bible in the sense of the documentary confirmation that we have found over the years? Not only do we have accurate copies of the Old Testament, but the contents of the manuscripts are historically reliable. So you're looking at that. Now, the thing we're looking right now is this point we've gotten to. Tel Mardika, the discovery of Elba. Elba tablets, 17,000 tablets from an area called Tel Mardika in northern Syria, dating from 2300 BC, shows us that 1,000 years before Moses, laws, customs, and events were recorded in writing in that part of the world, and that the judicial proceedings and case laws were very similar to that in Deuteronomy law code. In other words, look at Deuteronomy 22:22-30, where they have codes on punishment for sex offenses. One tablet mentions and lists the 5 cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar in the exact sequence which we find in Genesis 14:8. Is that corroboration or what? Until these tablets were uncovered, the existence of Sodom and Gomorrah has always been in doubt by historians. So we see little minutiae things that we can trust over and over and over and over again. Then the whole of the Bible can be more and more trusted. as valuable, especially things in the Bible that you can't prove out as true. They're not scientific. Certain great events occurred. You can see the archaeological digs that lead up to that and say that should have happened that way. Like the walls in Jericho falling outward instead of inward, or inward instead of outward. One of the greatest archaeological finds in this century is the discovery of Elba in 1964. Professor Paolo Mattia, archaeologist from the University of Rome, began a systematic excavation of a then unknown city. Due to the determination and foresight of this man, in 1974 and 1975, a great royal palace was uncovered that eventually yielded over 15,000 tablets and fragments. Giovanni Pettinato, an epigrapher, had worked closely with Mattia in helping to determine some of the paleographic significance of the find. At present, only a fraction of the tablets have been translated. We've got a lot of work to do. And interestingly enough, so far, everything is corroborative of the Bible, the Old Testament. It is now certain that upon this ancient site, the once prestigious city of Elba ruled the Near East as the seat of a great empire. Elba is located near the modern city of Aleppo in North Syria. It's interesting, these parts were so great in ancient times, and now they're just smaller. So history can change things, turn things completely around. Some of the greatest parts of the world that had the greatest empires located in them now are second-rate areas. The zenith of Elba was principally in the 3rd millennium BC, coterminous with the time of the patriarchs. Although the Elba texts at present do not specifically mention biblical people or events, although there is much debate over the issue of small things. Let's look at small things, see how they add up. They do provide an abundance of background. There's your background, small material, and small little bits, thousands and thousands, millions of bits put together, show consistency with what the Bible says without having to name names all the time. So background material and biblical names for evaluating the biblical narrative. If you have the small details, all your ducks in a row, the larger items that are even more important will become trustworthy in your mind. Who's going to go through such great detail to prove out the story the Bible writers did, and then the great theological points of view here are more trustworthy, that can't be proved out? So far, only the tip of the iceberg has been seen. Although the evidence has taken time to surface, listed here is some of the support for the biblical narratives. Biblical towns. In reference to the identification of biblical towns in the Elba archives, Kitchen notes, K.A. Kitchen, noted Egyptologist, not a few towns of biblical interest appear in the Elba tablets, which preserve in most cases the earliest known mention of these in written records. Most useful potentially are the Eblate mentions of familiar Palestinian place names such as Hazor, Megiddo, Jerusalem, Lachish, Dor, Gaza, Ashtaroth, Quarnim, etc. Several of these places are known archaeologically to have been inhabited towns in the 3rd millennium BC. That's the early Bronze Age, according to geologists. And these tablets confirm their early importance, possibly as local city-states. Finally, Canaan itself now appears as a geographical entity from the later 3rd millennium BC, long before any other dated external mentions so far known to us. It will be interesting to learn what extent is accorded to Canaan in the Elba texts. So they've got tens of thousands of these tablets, and I wish we had more people to go and look at them and interpret them and give us more corroboration of the Bible. Biblical names. The most important contributions of the Elba occurrences of these and other such names are to emphasize once more that these are names by real human beings, individuals, never by gods, or exclusively, if ever, by tribes or by fairy tale figures. And so we can't call the Bible a lot of mythology. And to indicate the immense antiquity of names of this type, and of these names in particular, who would spend all this time to make up all this fictitious information in the Bible and then find it corroborating historical information? Who would take all that time to be accurate with those details to support the interesting things that you can't prove or disprove because they're theological principles? Dr. Giovanni Pettinato gives clear, albeit variations on such Hebrew names as Israel, Ishmael, and Micaiah. Ancient Near Eastern tribute. Some consider the tribute received by Solomon at the height of his empire as fanciful exaggeration. But the find at Elba offers a different interpretation of the accounts. There you go. Details. Imperial Elba, at the height of its power, must have had a vast income. From one defeated king of Mauri alone, a tribute of 11,000 pounds of silver and 880 pounds of gold was exacted on one occasion. This 10 tons of silver and over 1/3 of a ton of gold was no mean haul in itself. Think of the value of it today. Yet it was simply one delectable extra so far as treasury accounts of Elba were concerned. In such an economic content, the 666 talents, about 20 tons of gold, as Solomon's basic income from his entire empire, some 15 centuries later, which is in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles, loses its air of exaggeration and begins to look quite prosaic, as just a part of a wider picture of the considerable, if transient, wealth of major kingdoms of the ancient biblical world. The comparisons just given do not prove that Solomon actually did receive 666 talents of gold, but it proves plausibility, or that his kingdom was organized just as Kings describes. But they do indicate clearly, one, that the Old Testament data must be studied in the context of their world and not in isolation, which most historians do. They draw conclusions based on no evidence at all when they haven't even investigated the evidence. And number two, that the scale of activity portrayed in the Old Testament writings is neither impossible nor even improbable, but plausible when measured by the relevant external standards, based on just these tablets of the everyday activities of this kingdom that no longer exist, but the tens of thousands of tablets do. Religious practices. The Elba texts reveal that many of the Old Testament religious practices are not as late as some critical scholars have espoused. In matters like priests, cults, and offerings, the records from Elba so far merely reinforce for Syria-Palestine what we already know from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia in the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st millennia BC, and from the records of North Syrian Qatna and Ugarit for the 2nd millennium BC also. Namely, their well-organized temple cults, sacrifices, rituals were a constant feature of ancient Near Eastern religious life at all periods from prehistory down to Greco-Roman times. They have nothing to do with baseless theories of the 19th century AD, whereby such features of religious life can only be a mark of late sophistication, virtually forbidden to the Jews until after the Babylonian exile, alone of all the people of the ancient East. So they say, oh, that's all just a matter of fiction. There is simply no rational basis for the quaint idea that the simple rites of Moses' tabernacle, Leviticus, or of Solomon's temple, both well over 1,000 years later, than the rituals practiced in half a dozen Eblate temples, must be the idle invention of idolizing writers of latest the 5th century BC. Giovanni Pettinato comments on the source of the specifics referred to by Kitchen. Passing on to the divine cult, we note the existence of temples of Dagon, Ashtar, Kamos, Resap, all attested in the text from Elba. Among the offerings are listed bread, drinks, and even animals. 2 tablets in particular stand out because they record the offerings of various animals to different gods made by the members of the royal family during a single month, by 11 of the members. For example, 11 sheep for the god Adad from the En as an offering, 12 sheep for the god Dagon from the end as an offering, 10 sheep